Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, Straight Shooting LJA, the G-Man and Jazzy Fizzle proudly, usually bring you a Monday night footballing fix. But once again, we're venturing down that dark, seedy underbelly of football. Nah, I'm kidding. We're not doing that. We're just going behind the scenes in football because this is another installment of Pitch Talk Meets. And I am proud to say I am sitting next to an FA Level 2 qualified coach and also a qualified head teacher as well. I am sitting next to the lovely Miss Manisha Tailor. I mean, that's the best intro I can give you. But
that's a lovely introduction.
Let us know what are you up to and how are you as well?
Yeah, I'm okay. I'm a bit busy this week. I'm off, of course. Schools are off, so it's half term. So I'm just busy doing some coaching, football stuff really this week.
The beginning is where we're going to start. We tend to find the beginning is the most logical place to start rather than starting at the end and coming all the way back. So
yeah, definitely.
Let's start at the beginning. So who is Manisha Tailor and what motivates Manisha Tailor?
What motivates me is the football, and working with children. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to do the two. So really, I think, it's a win-win for me because I'm able to do the two things that I love, which is education and football.
I hear that. Who would you say influenced you growing up?
Well, in my family, very sporty, in particular my dad. So my dad played squash at just normal league level, and I've got a twin brother. So my brother's, I think from 8 or 9, joined up in the same squash club, and there was also cricket, of course. Football, but my dad, I don't ever remember my dad taking us out to have a kickabout. It was more we watched it on TV. Whereas with the squash, it was slightly different. So myself and my brother both joined at about 8 or 9, and we played Middlesex County. We played squash there along with my dad and snooker. We regularly used to go and play snooker once a week, and we've got pool table at home. So we used to, so it was in terms of actively playing, it was pool, snooker, and squash. The football, though, that interest came from school. Me and my brother used to play at primary school, as many other kids did, I'm sure. And to be honest, that is all we ever wanted to do at school. Teachers weren't too impressed, I can tell you.
Breaking windows all over the gaff.
Yeah, a few complaints about not paying attention to what we should have paid attention to. Many times I remember my mum being called in, being told, "Oh, your kids haven't done their homework." But yeah, so in terms of the football interest, that started off at home, but then in terms of playing actively, that was definitely at school.
So would you say, especially in a sporting perspective, it was your dad that influenced you in terms of sport and just growing up in general?
Yeah, I mean, my mum too. My mum loves tennis, and she liked athletics, and I think that's why when I went on to secondary school, I did athletics there, and I was part of the athletics team. So both my mum and dad, but more so with specific sports. Like, going to play snooker once a week, going to play squash a couple of times a week would be, that was my dad, yeah. So I think, naturally what your parents are sometimes interested in, you also tend to become interested in that as well. Although my dad was a Liverpool supporter and I'm not. So that bit of interest didn't happen. But in sport in general, yeah, very sporty family, definitely.
Your dad's a great man being a Liverpool supporter. He will never walk alone. He'll never walk alone. Then look at the G-Man off camera.
Indeed.
Surrounded by Arsenal fans at the moment. It's terrible. But Our first fan question is from Thomas Hewitt, aka Big T, one of our regulars. Got to throw the T's up for Big T. It's always the way. But he asks, who is your idol / inspiration when it comes to football coaching, and why?
I'd have to say it would, in terms of who's inspired me to be a coach, would be Rachel Yankee. Simply because, well, I started coaching in 2003, so quite a while ago, but without any qualifications. So when I say coaching, I mean I just really did what I thought was best, which pretty much was just, right, kids, let's go out and have a kickabout. Yeah. A few other bits, of course, but in terms of structure of sessions and things like that, I didn't know, and at that time there wasn't anybody. When I was working full time then, especially within the schools and within the departments, to kind of guide and say, oh, you do know that you can go off and get qualifications. And it was very later on. I mean, I was actually, funny enough, just looking at what year I actually got my badges, and it was 2010. So it was 2010 when I did my level 1. Mm-hmm. Straight away, a few months later, I was then put forward for my level 2. Yeah. And then this year I did both the youth modules 1 and 2. So it was, the quite a big years in terms of when I started coaching to when I officially now coach, on piece of paper. Rachel I met when I was an assistant head. I think this was probably maybe about 2007, 8. I knew her beforehand because, Rachel's born and brought up in Brent, and I worked in a couple of Brent schools, so we did a lot of football education projects together, and so she knew I did some coaching and stuff, but like I said, it wasn't until a few years later she knew I coached the schools team, and we had a bit of chat here and there, but nothing ever came out of that. But it was only a few years later that we had an actual conversation about coaching, a coaching pathway, and she's mentioned, oh, you do realise if you went on the county website, you could go off and get your badges, and that's when I thought, oh, actually, I didn't know that. So anyhow, I had a look, did my level 1 through London FA, and at that time I did it with London FA, but also it was linked to London Plainfields Foundation, and I was fortunate enough to also get that part funded. And that was purely because I was put on their female development programme. So we go back to Rachel. So I went on my level 1, and then when I was put forward for my level 2, you had to also have a certain amount of coaching hours, and I wanted to up the hours I was doing because at school, to be honest, I was only coaching an hour a week. And then Rachel said to me, oh, you realise on the weekends they run a youth soccer team. So, and that was quite local. So she said, come down whenever you want to. And it was the support that I got from her, I just, I'm really grateful for. So I was able to not only go down and coach on the weekends, but also I was able to shadow some of the sessions she does. And obviously, being an elite player, somebody who plays for Arsenal ladies, England, as part of Team GB, I think that kind of says it all in terms of her knowledge and understanding of the game. So inspiration, definitely, first and foremost, I'd definitely say Rachel. But then when I actually was progressing in terms of my coaching journey, it would then have to be Alex Welsh, who he's the chief executive at London Plainfields Foundation. Now, if it wasn't for Alex, I don't believe I would have had the confidence to further myself as a coach. He's been very supportive of me, helping me and mentoring me through the level 2. There were other people involved as well, but even thereafter, so years, a couple of years later, I can still email or contact Alex, and any problems, any issues, he's more than happy to help. So definitely Rachel to get me onto the pathway in terms of getting actual qualifications. When I was on the pathway, Rachel still along the way, Alex Welsh at London Plainfields Foundation, and Corey Donoghue. He played professionally, and he was my level 1 tutor. And since I did my level 1, we then became friends, and he also has been really helpful. And to this day, I would still call him up and say, I've got an idea for this session, or, I've got this idea, is there anything you can help me with? So I think I've been really lucky, because through my journey, I've met different people who've been very supportive. And then when I got onto my youth modules just recently, it was Callum Munerick, Alan Ackrell at Hertfordshire County FA is where I did my youth modules. Again, if even after finishing the course, if there's anything I need in terms of session planning or any advice, I can contact them anytime, and I have done so.
That's a good journey.
Yeah, definitely. And also, just adding to that, I'd say would be John Bear as well at Arsenal Ladies, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be getting the experience in scene coaching at a Centre of Excellence. Now, so with Rachel, it's brilliant, because I've shadowed her sessions and looked at her knowledge as an elite player, and then how she transferred that to a grassroots club. So on the weekend, I see grassroots coaching. But then what I'm now able to also do with John is go down to Arsenal and have a look at how coaches deal with players that are a lot more able, because there's a massive difference between the two. So I guess for me, like I said, Rachel definitely to start off with, Alex Welsh, Callum, and John Baird most definitely.
Nice one. What team do you support? Let's get this out of the way early.
Arsenal. I'm a definite Arsenal fan. See, I'm born and brought up in North London, but I was never an Arsenal fan to begin with. I did go through quite a few teams. I supported Wimbledon, Oxford, remember, was one. And also my dad, and my brother are Liverpool fans, and so my whole family is. I think actually Liverpool has quite a big Asian fan base, funnily enough. My cousin tried to convert me to an Everton fan. He bought me the hat actually that said Toffee Men on it, and he thought maybe that might work. Well, it didn't.
You go, here's a baseball cap, try it.
Yeah. We play Sabutio and so on. Yeah, you can be this player. No, it didn't quite work. It was many years later actually. I think probably about it was around 94 that I then geared towards Arsenal, and then have stuck with Arsenal ever since, and follow the ladies team as well. But I think through the years though, because I became interested in football in 98. I was 8 years old, gives away my age now, doesn't it? Started playing football then as well actually, and obviously in terms of influences at home, there, my dad being a Liverpool fan, if I think about players that kind of inspired me, or players that I thought were absolute legends, I played in goal, so I really wanted to be like Bruce Grobbelaar. Really loved Bruce Grobbelaar.
Did you do the wobbly legs and all that as well? I did that this past weekend. It didn't work, but it was fun to do.
And other players that I thought were brilliant were Ian Rush, Peter Beardsley, John Barnes. But also, I was really fascinated by Gary Lineker and Paul Gascoigne. I thought they were just absolutely brilliant. And Tottenham, because of the fact that, lived in North London. But then, like I said, obviously George Graham, and there's Paul Merson, Ian Wright, and so on. And those, I was definitely then, an Arsenal fan, and of course Arsene Wenger. And not looked back ever since.
I hear that. I mean, Arsene's always promoting young players, and bringing young players through.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are a lot of jokes, but I won't go into them right now. For the sake of professionalism, I won't go into some of the Tottenham fans have been awfully harsh, and you can see the G-Man grinning behind the camera because of that. But so do you've mentioned that you played growing up. Do you play at the moment?
I do, I still play at the moment. I play, county league football. I play 11-a-side once a week, and obviously with training in addition to that once a week. And I play 5-a-side as well, once a week. I think it's important, purely now for fitness. But I think also it's important, if as a coach, the more I play, the better my understanding is of the game. So I think both kind of go hand in hand. Having said that, you don't have to play to be a coach. You can still have knowledge of the game and not play, because of course you can watch the game. But for me, it's just as a personal thing, I think my understanding has developed through playing more. So yeah.
There have been the stories and kind of the legends, as some would say, in terms of mediocre players being great managers. Would you subscribe to that theory as well? Or because apparently Arsene Wenger was supposed to be a mediocre player, Mourinho, Benitez, among others. Would you lean on the side of it's usually the mediocre players that become better managers, or do you think the greater players end up having do you think the greater players have a better chance of being better managers, or is it?
You see, my coaching to me would be like teaching. So it has a completely different skill set to a player. And I remember reading, actually, there was an article recently on Barnet, in fact, actually. It was to do with, it was, now that I'm recollecting, Edgar Davis, isn't it?
Yeah, the David situation is very, very interesting. It's big.
There was a bit on the article, and it was to do with exactly what you said, actually. Would a great player necessarily make a great coach? And one of the arguments to that was it has a completely different skill set, which is the angle that I come from, that I think it definitely does. You can have, one great thing is you've got very good understanding of the game, like the technical aspect of the game, and that first and foremost, you need, especially at that level. But do you then have the other skills that you need to help develop players? Things like being able to communicate well, things like being able to differentiate sessions, being able to cater for different types of learners, having an understanding of how players learn. Are you able to build a rapport with them? Are you able to get the best out of a player? Are you able to get, you might get the best out of a player, what about as a team? That to me has a different skill set to somebody who is just a great player. Perhaps, you can get one who can do both, but I think it's difficult to differentiate whether a great, how you asked me about, will a great player make a great coach, or will a mediocre player make a great coach? I think they're two different skill sets. So I don't think you can compare. What I would say is that it's based on the person and whether they have those skills that I mentioned already. And if they don't, because I remember watching Footballers' Football Show once, and actually there was that very debate after I read the article was going on, and one of the things that they mentioned was that you work as a team within the management team. So if there's something that you're weaker at, what are you going to do? Of course, as a manager or a leader, you're going to get somebody in who has expertise in that particular area. Naturally, you would do that. So you're distributing leadership. You're not using this top-down model where I do everything and this is how we're going to run it. It's actually accepting, do you know what, I know this, perhaps don't know that, so I'm going to get an expert in that does. So I think it's really, especially for coming as a teacher, I've seen the skills that I've seen teachers teach, and I've seen how I've been able to use my teaching skills in coaching. And some people may argue and say that, or have an opinion and say, oh no, coaching and teaching are completely different. I think obviously it's down to opinion. My opinion is that the skills are transferable. I won't say that they're the same, but I'd definitely say that they're transferable.
I hear that. Hey, you mentioned about having opinions. That's what we're all about, having opinions. So it's all good.
So if they have the skill set, then yes. So if we go to Arsene Wenger, not just because I'm an Arsenal fan.
No bias.
But I really, if there's somebody who I would love to go and watch coach, it would be him. Simply because I love the way that he encourages young players to learn and develop, and that's what I'm all about. You know, I'm very passionate about how children learn, and I think that I see coaching as being an educator. We as educators have to know how children learn and develop if we're to get the best out of them. If we don't, then they're not going to learn. You know, I think it's up to us to motivate that, and I think that Arsene Wenger does that really well. You know, I think that he's very good at creating and developing young players. You know, you look at Cesc Fabregas, how young was he when he started? Yeah, he's gone off to Barcelona now. You know, look how much he developed and learnt as a young player.
That's true.
You know, and we're looking at somebody like Gnabry now, who's in the team, 17 years old. You know, and looking at him already, you know, I'm thinking, you know, if Fabregas developed in the same way, you know, what's to say that he isn't going to do the same?
But we've got a question. We've got a question coming in kind of relating to that, like kind of relating to that sort of thing in a bit. So we're definitely gonna come to that. But we're gonna come back just for a brief second. What were your from our co-host to G-Man? What were your first pair of football boots, and what are you currently wearing now?
My first pair of football boots were Predators.
Is it?
Yeah, and I still am actually. Although I've got a couple of Nike, you know, I've got quite a few now. But I do like Predators. I like the designer Predators.
So have you done the typical feminine thing whereby it's like, all right, most women have loads of shoes, you've got loads of football boots, so you've kind of gone the other way with it?
I've totally, yeah, gosh. You know, I really get it from my mum, no word of a lie. I would go to the shops and buy an Arsenal, you know, a couple of Arsenal tops. So for instance, you know, go to the gym, the only thing you ever see me wear at the gym day in, day out would be my tracksuit bottoms and an Arsenal top. You know, and I'd have a different top for go to the gym 7 days a week. So, you know, a different top for different day of the week.
Do you know, I can't criticize that because the G-Man's seen, the G-Man's pointing off camera, he's seen the amount of Liverpool shirts I've got. I could legitimately wear one, I could wear a Liverpool or England shirt, I could wear one a day almost for 2 weeks straight without having to change, without having to wash one. That's kind of including a couple that are a bit tight. But your first pair of boots being Predators, are we talking the original Predators from, I think it was the 94-95 season? Actually, no, it's 95-96 season where Beckham scored that lob. Are we talking those Predators, the originals?
Oh no, I wish. No, we're not talking those ones, because so when I started playing football, see, there was a massive gap in between, you see. So when I started playing at primary school, and at that time, I didn't have a pair of football boots. I didn't even have a kit. I had to borrow. I borrowed the boys. I was playing in goal, and I borrowed the boys. Who was in goal? I borrowed his kit, and purely because, you know, we think about that time, there was a lot of cultural pressures. And although my dad was, you know, I said my family was very sporty, let's not forget that it was the 80s. Coming from an Asian background, they're very sporty, but sport stayed at school. My parents were very academic, and it was about get an education. So if money was to be spent, it was going to be spent on books.
We're gonna come into that.
Money was not going to be spent
definitely
on shoes, or, you know, like me getting football boots. I mean, I dare not even ask my mum and dad at that time, can you buy me a pair of football boots? You know, purely because I know what the answer would have been. And so, when I played, so I had trainers, of course, played with trainers. You know, I had my Astros and whatnot. Then when I went off to secondary school, there were no girls' football teams, and we, you know, at a certain age, you're not allowed to play mixed football anymore. So it's, you know, you kind of have you have your separate teams. Now, in the 90s, you know, how many women played football? Wasn't as popular as obviously it's getting now. And, you know, when I did play, it was in my school uniform. I'd be in my, you know, skirt, my shirt, whatnot, my school shoes even, and I'd be on the field with the boys. to be honest, I wasn't very ladylike at that time, not at all. Yeah, I mean, I didn't really care whether I was sweaty or what I looked like. You know, for me, it was just I wanted to play. So, you know, me and this other girl would be the only two girls on the field. Everyone knew where to find us. Yeah.
Punch.
And I remember when it was my PE teacher, Mr. Sharma, you know, he always used to get me to do demonstrations at school when we had to have a PE lesson. And I felt quite good because I thought, I must be all right. It's getting me to do some of their demos.
There's another way that could go, but I'm called a wrong un, but I'm not straying down that road.
But never any team. So then my football stopped. So in terms of trainers and, you know, proper gear, it wasn't a necessity. But then again, the push from home also then stopped, purely because it was very much about get an education, do well in your studies. So I didn't get my first pair of boots were for my own money, and that was only probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
When I took it up again, very later on.
So we're talking, 07, 08 then?
Yeah. There was a massive, because I played consistently at school, at primary school, played at secondary school, however, just on the field. You know, at lunchtime, there was no teams. My school, you know, certainly didn't have a team. My mum and dad were not going to take me to any clubs, you know, let's just face it and be honest. Although, you know, when I was 9 years old, I did get scouted. I went to trials for Barnet and I got in, and Mill Hill as well. And but at that age, and I think, you know, it's really important to say this, is you rely on your parents' support. And if you don't have that, and you don't have that understanding from your parents that it's okay to have an extracurricular activity that you can do on a weekend, then, you know, you're just not going to go by yourself, are you? 8 or 9 years old, you know, I dare not ask, can I jump on the bus? You know, so
I was one of them kids who really just kind of did it.
Oh no!
There is one story.
I had that fear factor.
There is one story that I can regale everyone with, but it's not for the show. But it's
yeah, a lot. And you know, a recent conversation that I had with my mum was to do with what was your reason behind not letting me then go through with Barnet, because there's always our what ifs. And you know, don't get me wrong, I don't have any regrets, and I still count myself lucky because I'm still in the game. You know, I just wanted to know where she was coming from, really. And an interesting answer, because what she said was that what would other people have thought at that time? She said, Manisha, in the 80s, many women didn't play football, but put women aside, many Indian women didn't play football. So she said, I was worried about what my mum, what her, you know, mum or dad, or what her brothers and so on, what the family would have thought. What would they have said if I had let you join a club and play? She said, I was happy for you to play, but play in school. Had my secondary school had a team, perhaps I would have played a bit more competitive football. So it wasn't don't play, it was play as long as it's associated with school.
Okay.
Which is why, if we think about now, hence a lot of, there's a big uptake with football in schools. It's convenient. You look at some of the areas, so we look at Brent, for example, and you know, very much majority BME population, massive uptake after school clubs. Does that then translate to weekends? It's debatable.
Well, I think it depends. I think it depends on the kid, really. For me,
at
for
8
me,
or 9 years
anyway.
of age, I'd have to disagree. I'd say I don't think it does. I think it depends on whether you have it in you to counter-argue with your parents, and I certainly didn't. And you know, Mum and Dad were very strict, so I wouldn't even dare argue with the fact that I wanted to go off to Barnet, I wanted to go to Mill Hill, I wanted some new boots. You know, that just wasn't happening.
Coaching is next chapter. When did you start coaching, and how did you get into coaching? I know you briefly kind of skimmed over it, but in terms of the details, when exactly did you start, and how did you get into it?
So we're talking about officially with the badges?
Yeah, everything.
Okay, so officially would be 2010 then, I suppose, because that's when I, got on the route of getting my badges. So it was through Rachel, as mentioned already. She guided me in terms of where to go. So it was my local county FA. So I did my level 1 through London FA. I was put on their female development programme, and that was linked with London Playing Fields Foundation. Because I was on their female development programme, they subsidised the level 1 for me. And it was actually, the level 1 was a female only course. Okay. And that was quite nice actually, because I think it made me feel a lot more, a lot more comfortable. And being the first the first course to go on, especially in terms of football, sometimes it can be quite intimidating. So that was quite good. So did that. My level 1 tutor was Corey Donoghue, and he was brilliant. And he then put me forward, myself and another lady. He put us forward for level 2. Now the level 2 is it's quite different to the level 1. I think there's a massive gap between the two. So we were lucky enough with the help of the London Playing Fields Foundation. Those who were put forward for the level 2 were put on a special mentoring program, which was like a few-week intense program. You'd have to go on the weekends, and they would prep you. There'd be tutors there, and they would prep you on what to expect. And I thought that was really good, because they really took the time out to ensure that we were ready and best prepared before we even got there. So we did that, and that was, like I said, all day on the weekend. So it's people who are looking to get into it really will need to think about how much time do they have, first of all, and how can they best manage it. And it's something you've got to really be passionate about, because if you're not, you're going to get sick of the hours, you're going to get tired, especially if you're working full time. I mean, with coaching, it's something you do in addition to your normal job. So you might do it on the weekends, you might do it on the evenings. So, and with the courses as well, you have to give up you might have to give up certain holidays. Like for my level 1, being a teacher, I can only ever get holidays, of course, in term time. Mm-hmm. Sorry, non-term time. Term time.
You say in term time, what?
Yeah. In non-term time. So I had to look for courses that were in school holidays. And the people are very accommodating. And, I emailed and told them my situation. And there were courses available during school holidays. With the same thing with the level 2. Of course, the prep course was on the weekends. But the actual course I had to find during the school holidays. So didn't go away during the summer, spent the few weeks doing the level 2, and then as soon as the level 2 finished, you then have to go and build your portfolio. So for that you need coaching hours, and how long it takes you is kind of up to the individual. So if you're coaching just once a week, it perhaps may take you longer to go for your assessment than somebody who might be coaching a few hours a week. They have certain session guidelines you have to follow and stuff. So for me, like Rachel then stepped in and said, so I was coaching at school for an hour a week. Rachel then stepped in and said, if you want to up your hours, I'm more than happy for you to come to our youth football club, which is Gibbons Wreckers, and that's based in Northwest London. It's part of the Harrow Youth League. And went down there on the Saturday mornings, and I was able to shadow and watch not just her, but also some of the other great coaches that are there. I was also able to take some sessions, which then was put towards my portfolio for the level 2. And in between, of course, I said, mentioned about how wonderful Alex Welsh is. He was there to help me out as well, and so he was very supportive throughout the whole thing, because the level 1 was female only. The level 2, however, was a completely different ball game. Completely. it was me and 2 other females out of, it was quite a large group actually. So they had 2 tutors there. It's Tom Udall and Alex. It's about 40, I'd say about 40 people, because they split it into 2020, roughly anyway. So 3 females out of, 3 or 4 females out of 40 guys. So very intimidating, but the head start that a couple of us had was we were put on that mentoring program, which was brilliant. So we already had a heads up on what to expect. Having said that, you go into a predominantly male environment, being prepped or not, that's still scary, you know, and admittedly, I was scared.
No, there's nothing wrong with being scared, it's just kind of how you deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's where you have to be resilient, you have to be positive about your own knowledge and what you know, and actually just, in terms of being resilient, ensure that you know where you might get comments, or you might have people that might be, you know, condescending and stuff. You've got to manage that, and you've got to learn how to overcome that. You know, lucky enough, you know, I think I was, you know, able to do that, but I was also able to do that with the support network that I had, which was great. Alex was brilliant. I had Rachel, she was brilliant. Corey Donahue from my level 1, absolutely fantastic. And that is important. I think you have to build a rapport with people. You know, people are going to be there, yes, but it's all about how you communicate with them, and also how you take on board their support. So if you take criticism as criticism, then maybe you won't develop as further as what maybe you would do if you took it as constructive. And I'm somebody, I suppose, you know, I love to learn, and I suppose that's, you know, hence in terms of teaching, it's not just about children learning, I see it as myself learning as an educator. And I'm more than happy, you know, we get observed all the time. Either you're getting observed by your senior management team, or, you know, now if I was to go in and observe, it might be through, you know, Ofsted inspectors, your head teacher and stuff. And it's all to do with it's all to do with professional development. It's all to do with continuous learning. So you build up that resilience. And I guess for me, what's been easier is that I've been able to do that through a span of 12 to 13 years that I've been in education as a teacher. So I've then been able to build that and then use that now as when I go to these coaching courses. So that really helped me, especially when, you know, very few females, you then also have to put on sessions. And this is before the assessment, this is during the course. So of course it's intimidating, you know, especially because if you're somebody that coaches maybe 1 hour a week, you would have to coach within a group of people who might be coaching 4 or 5 hours a week. And that can be really difficult. And I think female or male, I think that's going to be difficult for anybody. Because you've got people that are completely different. You've got people that work full time and can only give up an hour. You've got people there who were coaches working in academies who just did football. So they might have coached part-time, but they also might be sports development officers and stuff. Whereas I was a completely different kettle of fish, you know. I worked in a school. I coached the year 6 boys team because we had, you know, we only had a boys team for that particular year. And my evenings were spent doing action planning or some other, you know, management stuff, data analysis and stuff. Yeah. Weekend coaching, I mean, Rachel was brilliant when it came to my level 2, but even that I struggled every week with. And, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I went there every week. No, I didn't, because I was trying to juggle my full-time work. I just went in as an assistant head at that time. So yeah. I'm juggling with a new role that I want to do, you know, want to do it well. And then I'm also trying to get my coaching hours. So it's really hard. You really have to prioritize. And for me, that was going to be my priority. So it was then, did I have a social life? No, I didn't. Yeah. You know, my weekends were spent on football. My evenings were then dedicated towards school. And of course, you know, I had to do school stuff on the weekends as well. So no, I wasn't able to, in terms of my coaching hours for my level 2, it was really, I found it a real struggle. Managed to do it though in the end. But your assessment days now, so your assessment days would be dependent on how long it takes you. So you get set assessment days, and those assessment days would be associated with the people that you've become comfortable with. So of course there was this group of 20 to 40 lads that, you know, I'd become comfortable with over the span of the week, because you're with them, don't forget, it was, you know, 8 to 4, or sometimes 8 to 5. Long day, and, you know, over a span of a week. So you do build a rapport and you get to know them. And the assessment days, I looked at them and it fell on the 2nd and 3rd of September. So the level 2 actually I did in August. Of course, in August is my school holidays. 2nd and 3rd of September, I'm now going back to school. I suddenly thought, oh dear, do I ask my head teacher? She was aware of me doing the course, and actually, you know, the head teacher at the time there was brilliant, because she paid, so where with my level 1 they subsidised, the London Playing Fields Foundation subsidised some of it, my head teacher then paid the rest.
Oh, that's cool.
Level 2, however, you know, I paid for, but my head teacher did pay the rest of my level 1, because it was, you know, it was a give and take. She knew I was coaching the schools team, so she said it's only fair that you're going to give your time to the boys. It's only fair that we also give you a bit towards the course. When it comes to though taking the first 2 days of inset training off, you know, I can understand that wasn't, you know, thought I'd ask. Clearly didn't go down as I knew it wouldn't. So I had to then switch my assessment days. So my assessment days I then did on a weekend, but with a completely different group.
Okay, so the rapport's no longer there, so it's kind of like...
So so I then went in with a group of lads, so I was then now the only female there. At least when I did my actual course, there was, you know, a couple of us. Group of lads, didn't know any of them. Very intimidating, purely because it's a completely new group. I wasn't somebody that was coaching enough, I don't feel, you know, at that time, because I was still, like I said, trying to get to grips with my new role in terms of school. So I was coaching, but not as much as some of the others that were there, who were clearly very knowledgeable. You know, you could hear that in their conversations. And also, you know, there were some that were very welcoming and some, you know, really nice, but you've got different personalities and characters, haven't you? So you've got people that know each other already, so they've already got a little clique. You've got some who are like myself, who didn't know anybody really. So you're trying to mingle, but it's really hard, and it's hard for everybody because everyone knew that they're there for an assessment. So naturally, it's like going into a school hall for an exam, isn't it? You know, you're nervous as it is. So the only thing you want to concentrate on really is reflecting on your session, the session that you're going to deliver. Is it right? You want to just work on that. Forget about talking to anybody.
Focus
you know,
on
I'm
yourself,
not here to make friends. You know, I just want to focus on what it is that I need to get done. And yeah, you know, did my assessment, and lucky for me that Alex Welsh happened to come down for that day. Now Alex, you know, obviously Alex knew me from the level 2, and for me, just Alex being there made me feel a lot more comfortable, purely because it was a face that I knew. It was somebody that I knew, exactly, somebody I was familiar with, somebody who I trusted, and who I knew was giving me a lot of support. So did my assessment, you know, luckily I passed, and then a couple of years later, so just recently now, 2012, heard about these youth modules. And the youth modules I heard about when I was doing some shadowing at Arsenal. So in terms of the coaching, did the level 2. So then after the level 2, I then moved in terms of my schools, became an assistant head. I then became a deputy head. I was training to be a head teacher, and I was doing my masters in leadership. Doing quite a lot at the same time. So I kind of then had to, you know, reflect and think, as much as I like to think I can do everything, I really can't, you know. we're only human. So I then stuck to the coaching at school, which was, trying to fit in an hour at least. But the weekends with at Gibbons, I then had to take a step back on, because my workload at school was just phenomenal, and I really couldn't manage everything, and doing the degree and trying to finish my training to be a head teacher. So the weekend coaching stopped for a little while, and then a year after that, when I was a bit more, I suppose, into my role at school, and things had calmed. I wouldn't say that. I don't think schoolwork. Every teacher would tell you it never calms down, but you just find an easier way of managing it. Yeah. And I knew my role, quite well by then. So I'd finished my training for headship. I was on the verge of finishing my masters. So I thought I then had a bit more time, and that was one of the things I really wanted to do, was to get back at Gibbons. I really wanted to coach and manage my own team. Yeah. So Rachel, I was still in touch with, and she said, more than happy for you to come down. So this is my just into a third season now at Gibbons, with the under sevens, a mixture of under sevens and eights I've got that I coach and manage. Do that for 2 hours a week. And during that time, so from 2010 to now, I've also been, it's at Gibbons, but also been volunteering with the London FA. Any of their girls' festivals, I go and help out at. And I volunteer with the London Plainfields Foundation. Again, any of their girls in football initiatives. Also with Middlesex County FA. I've done that over the last couple of years. And more recently, I've been shadowing as a volunteer at Arsenal Ladies Centre of Excellence, and I've managed to see a range of age groups, and then found particular age groups that I wanted to spend more time with.
What age groups?
So I spent a lot of time with the nines. I've seen the nines, I've seen the 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 15s. In terms of adults, it was, I'm a youth coach. I know, I'm a primary school teacher. My expertise and knowledge lies with the younger children. However, I did at some point, think, I'd love to work with adults. So I want, 15s for now was the tops I was going to go to.
Yeah.
Because of course, in terms of technical knowledge, it's very different to what you would necessarily need to know to teach the sevens and the nines. So spend quite a lot of then time with the nines. Fantastic coaches. I really enjoyed looking at their sessions, seeing how they pitch their sessions. Because for me, it was more so that it's how do they pitch sessions at Centre of Excellence, and how does it differ to a grassroots club? So I've done that for a little while, and then got a good idea now of the nines, and I've been trying some of the things that I've seen, trying to replicate some of that, but at Gibbons. Obviously, in terms of differentiation, it would be different, but as a coach, we would know how to differentiate that. Now spending some time with the 11s, and we'll do again straight after half term. But John Bayer there, just fantastic in terms of support, and whenever I want to go down and have a look at their sessions, he's more than send him an email or contact. He's more than happy for me to go down. Alex Welsh was a goalkeeping coach at Arsenal for a very long time, and I think the more I've done a lot of voluntary work, and I still do, and I think it's really important that people who are thinking about going into coaching don't go with this mindset of I want to get paid straight away. Because as much as we want to get paid, you first foremost is why are you doing it? I'm doing it because I love the kids.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're not doing it for the love of it, then you're just going through the motions, really. I mean, you got to love you got to love what you're doing, especially if you're not getting paid for it. I mean, it's a case of some people have said about being, Matt Hodgson said in our first pitch talk meets about being prepared to be poor if you want to get into kind of filmmaking and that area. But I suppose it rings true with a lot of other areas as well. Yeah. But I mean, you were saying about level 2 being a bit intimidating, especially when it came to assessment time, because you were kind of put in with a different group because of scheduling conflict. Did you see that as kind of, was the intimidation partly because of resistance, or have you not experienced any resistance in the journey?
In specific to the level 2, the resistance the intimidation wasn't to do with them being resistant. That was purely a personal feeling. It's on how I felt, and the more confidence you gain, the more you overcome those barriers. So the more confidence I've gained, I'm now able to overcome being, I'm a lot less intimidated now than, what I was before. And, for me to work with an adults team, it was purely to help with that. Not only, but one of the things was I needed to get over the fact that I still sometimes am a little bit scared and intimidated. Sometimes I'd want to just, take a little step back and just watch when it comes to predominantly or, male environment. But, it's not all been hunky-dory, and let's not get it twisted. I've received a lot of support. Definitely I have. But there have been challenges through the journey, through the years, and there definitely have been emails that I've sent out, as we do. People I've messaged, people I've tried to get in contact with, where I've had no response, or very little response, or where I've had a response perhaps that I wouldn't have wanted. I've also been to places where I've felt that they have been slightly condescending or resistant towards me as an individual. And I've never, when I go to things or go to events, I never see it as, I've never put a label as an Asian female, and I never want to put a label. I see it as, I'm a coach. I'm female, but I'm a coach. Yeah. And that's kind of my mentality and my thinking, and that's just, how I've gone about things. So I would never want to comment on why people perhaps may have acted in a certain way or may have said things in a certain way. What I would say is it's purely, maybe it's just based on how I felt. Maybe they're not like that with others. Yeah. This is purely based on how I felt at certain events and things. And so, yeah, there have been challenges definitely along the way, but it requires a lot of resistance. You have to be very resilient as a person, and you have to be prepared to take on those challenges and not take them as a negative. You have to then flip them round and think, that negativity can only make you stronger. So it's how are you going to turn that into a positive?
I mean, you spoke of challenges, and that ties into the next question. What aspects of coaching do you enjoy, and what do you not enjoy?
I enjoy everything about coaching. You
really?
See, yeah. I think it's, maybe if I wasn't a teacher, I might answer it differently, but I love teaching, so I love coaching. For me, it translates into the same thing. I'd plan, for example, I'd spend time at home planning my session, because it's not just about you go there and you turn up, and you've got it in your head. No, especially, I'll reiterate when it comes to working with really young players. So I have an under-7s team at Gibbons. Now, some of those players are 5 years old, just turned 5. Some of them in the group are 6. Some of them are 7 going on 8, but not quite there to go into the next age group. So I've got quite a wide age gap. So not only have I got a wide age gap, I've got, in terms of maturity, it's quite wide. The numbers are also quite large in my group. The numbers have just kept increasing. I've now got from 8 that I started off with, 2-3 seasons ago, I've now got over 20.
That's quality.
Oh, it's brilliant, and it's, a couple of kids have spoken to their friends, and, and I think it's great, but that the age group poses challenges. So in terms of coaching, you would have to think carefully about how you differentiate your session, where you've got not just one age within the under sevens, you've got a range of ages. You've then got different levels of maturity of players. You've then got different abilities of players. And with the younger ones, now we go on for a 2-hour session. Many clubs especially for that age group, would only do an hour, because obviously their concentration span wouldn't cope for more than an hour.
See, I don't think that's limited to age, though. I don't think that's limited to age, because, like, I would personally say I've got somewhat of a short attention span. I'm 26. It's like,
if we're thinking about maturation, if you look at psychology, you look at, we want to delve into child psychology. It would, the level of maturation would be dependent on age. That's just the facts. So when you're planning your sessions, you have to cater for that. Now, so where we go on for a 2-hour session, for example, they won't cope with just an activity. So I would have to plan for many activities, and I have to break it down. So when I mean break it down, I mean it would be in different phases. So I would have one game, I then have to plan a totally different game to then get their attention back. Because after about 10 minutes, you've lost them. Yeah. I now need to engage them again, but with a new game. Yeah. There's no point me using the game I've just done, because they've done it already. Yeah. And they'll be quick to tell you, Coach Manisha, but we've just done this. So as a coach, working with that age group, you'd have to really think about your planning. But then when I've been a teacher, I've had to do the same. But there I've had a class of 30. So I've got a class of 30, again, wide, maybe perhaps not with wide age group, but wide ability range. So just because a child is 10 years old doesn't mean to say that they would be able to cope with the curriculum of a 10-year-old. So that planning aspect, you'd spend, some good time looking into creative ways of being able to plan for young players. Then obviously, your delivery, you're working around young players. And I suppose because I think it just comes down to the fact that I'm in teaching. I love teaching, I love working with children, hence I love football because I love working with children.
So you married
I love
all
coaching.
the three.
That's it. So for me, there isn't, of course, sometimes there'll be days where I think I'm really tired, and I'm not going to say everyone's human. Of course you're tired, but the joy you get out of it is where you see the kids, one, smile, knowing that at a grassroots club, that's probably maybe the only football that they get in, knowing that you've had an impact, that they're coming back and they're telling you, oh, I use the side of my foot to dribble a ball, or oh, I'm now able to do this. And I've introduced something. You see, I treat my coaching sessions as a lesson. So if I was getting observed, I want my lessons to be outstanding. Yeah. If I'm coaching, the quality of my sessions, paid or unpaid, grassroots or elite, my sessions have to be good or outstanding. So things that I might use, like drawings, pictures, and to what I've recently introduced is a football star of the week, like I would have done, like I did at school, for example. So there's football stickers and a football certificate that they get. So at the end of each session, I would choose, myself and my assistant coach would choose 2 players based on our values which they know is, I talk about respect, fair play. And I think it's important that we get these keywords across to children, not just think that they're too young to understand. Well, I'm all about challenging and extension. Yes, they may not be able to read the words, but it's our job then to provide a picture or show for them to understand what the word means. They capture it, it's like a picture. They capture what the word looks like, they'll know what it is. They might not read it, but they'll know what it is. So, we'll go through our, core values. So they know that they'll get an award if they're respectful to their friends, they play fairly, they listen to their coach's instructions, they listen to each other. Then we also look at who's been trying really hard, or it could be somebody who's come up with a new skill. It's not based on technical ability, it's based on the whole it's based on the holistic thing. So we're looking at, like the FA have brought in this 4-corner model, which is looking at social, psychological, technical and physical aspects of a player. And to me, that's just holistic development of how a child learns, if I think about that as an educator. And every week, so we'll choose 2 stars of the week. They then, at the end of the session, I'll explain why they've achieved it. We shake their hands and we take a photograph, and their photograph with a little description I put on the club website. So their parents and I'll inform some of their schools, because a lot of the kids come from a particular school. Mm-hmm. And a couple of kids who the school wants to target, I've emailed over to say, these particular children have been our football stars of the week. Could you then put this up on your interactive whiteboard at school? Or the children or the parents, I would say, their photographs on the club website. Yeah. So, if in terms of disliking, there isn't anything I dislike, because I love what I do. And if I didn't, I wouldn't have been in education for the last, 2001. I think it was, I qualified. I love football. I've been in football since 1988. So there isn't, of course, like I said, you get tired. You have days, even at the end of, on a Saturday morning. Sometimes it's an absolute nightmare, but you've got to love them, haven't you?
Nah, definitely. You're not going to get any argument out of me in terms of loving football.
It's about impact.
I look forward to Saturdays and playing for the Ibis, who we feature on the grassroots segment of the show. So
I think
there's always look ahead factor. Even though I'm a video editor by trade and I love doing that, I always just look to football, look to the weekend, not only to the Premier League and watching Liverpool and that kind of thing, but also playing it as well and just kind of getting involved, which actually does kind of lead us nicely onto our first video question.
Which of the two do you prefer doing? Playing or actually coaching?
That's from the G-Man.
Ooh, playing or actually coaching? It would be very difficult for me to decide on giving more weight to one or the other. I love playing, and I don't want to stop playing. So at the moment, I'm trying to, I suppose maybe then a little bit of weight goes towards the playing, because I don't want to stop playing. So because I love coaching, what I've now tried to do is find clubs or find teams where it doesn't clash with my training dates. So this adults team train on a Wednesday, which is perfect because I train on a Thursday. So I'm able to coach on the Wednesday and it doesn't interfere with my own training for when I play. And likewise, I play five-a-side on the Friday. I've managed to find ways of overcoming that. So maybe put a little bit more weight towards the playing, but it'd be, a couple of percentages here and there.
I hear that. That's fair enough. That is fair enough. I mean, another question from the G-Man. What do you consider to be your biggest strength and what do you consider to be your biggest weakness?
Ooh, my biggest strength would be differentiation. In terms of coaching?
Elaborate on that for us.
Is the question in terms of coaching? Your biggest strength in terms of as a coach?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd probably say being able to differentiate a session to cater for different learners, but I think that purely comes from my background as a teacher. So that would be thinking about different learning styles. So we have visual learners, auditory learners and kinesthetic learners. So you've got some players or some children who need to see things for them to understand. So that would then be me as a coach thinking of creative ways to allow them to visualize things. So with some of the younger ones, what I do is they love themes, they're very engaged by themes. So I might have like pictures. So for example, you know, I might have sharks and a fish and stuff, and just turn that into a football activity. Rather than hold up a cone, if I want them to stop, I might hold up a shark. You know, if I've told them that they're going to pretend to be sharks, for example. Or I've used a tactics board, and I do use that with my sevens, but it would be purely on the whiteboard, and I'll draw out the area, and I'll draw out exactly what it is that we're going to do. I then also demonstrate myself with some of the children so that they can actively see what we're going to do. You then, you know, allow them to go off and do it, and then bring them back, and then show them again as we have to. And in terms of the, you know, kinesthetic learners, again, it's just through doing. So getting them actively involved in demonstrating so that they're able to better understand. And those children who learn better through listening, they'll be, in theory, should be listening anyway, you know, for when I'm explaining. So I think probably being able to differentiate and cater for different learning styles as a coach. Things that I would like to further develop, and this actually was something that came up on my action plan, because when you do your coaching badges, you know, you have, and it's come up with my level 1, it's came up with my level 2, and I think it probably will continue to come up, and that would be the technical knowledge side of the game. And that's purely because, and you know, my coach educator said this as well, Manisha, you're not an ex-player, you're not an elite player. You play, and now the more that I've started to play, because at that time when I did my badges, actually I wasn't really. So it's now slightly different. I'm a lot more confident in the technical aspect of the game for adults, and me now playing more, I watch my coach. So for me, it's not just about when I go to my training sessions as a player, I'm watching him to see what he does in the sessions, because I then want to translate that to an adult session. I'll listen to what he says so that I can then reflect and think, is this something I can then implement into a session? So in terms of an area to develop, it would be the technical side of the game, which I feel that I'm a lot more confident in, but not as confident as perhaps, you know, I could be. But I think now, you know, working with Indian Gymkhana and the guys there, and especially working with Sharma, that's something that I'm working on.
It's always good to kind of work on the weaknesses and really kind of accentuate the strength. So
yeah, well, I think you never stop learning, to be honest. I think that, you know, we always have something to learn, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's a really important trait, especially if, you know, you want to further progress in life.
Couple of fan questions from a couple of our pitch talkers.
Interesting.
From Elliot Waller. He's asked, what would you recommend for coaches that are just starting up? And Russell Vernon has asked something along the same lines. What advice would you give to youngsters wanting to become football coaches in the future?
In terms of youngsters, you'd need to be 16 to go on your level 1. There are now so many, if you go to your county FA, so I'd advise any young coaches to go to their county FA, there are lots of bursaries available now for young coaches in particular. And I think when we talk about young, they've got an age bracket from 16 to 24 or something, you know. So it's quite a, you know, I think it's quite a decent age bracket there. So go to your county FA, get in touch with them. I definitely recommend also, when you go to your county FA, looking at local clubs, local grassroots clubs, and just get yourself involved as a volunteer. I think that's always, you know, a really good route. And often, if clubs think that you're somebody who perhaps might then later on help them out and help take on a team, then some clubs are also willing to pay for your level 1 coaching badge. So I think it's definitely worth doing that. What I would say now, you know, in terms of safeguarding, there's heaps and heaps of implications on safeguarding and child protection. So you need to make sure, you know, I'm kind of saying 8 times out of 10, most clubs will ask how your CRB checked. So again, you can do that through your county FA. You know, get in touch with the Education and Welfare Officer. Every county FA has one, and they're the ones who specifically deal with FA CRBs. that you can get done, because at least once you have that, you've got a license, I suppose, to then go off and volunteer.
Yeah.
And that, in terms of getting in, engaged with your local clubs, would be for any new coaches. And also, Kick It Out have their weeks of action. So it's also about being aware of not just Kick It Out, but other organisations that have things going on that you can then go and attend. And if we go back to Kick It Out, they also, within their weeks of action, they run safeguarding sessions, if emergency first aid sessions that with your coaching badges you also need to get as well, and they do that free of charge. You just register to say you're going to attend the Kick It Out event, and they have people on site already that will run the workshop. So I think first and foremost, CRB, Education and Welfare Officer, County FA, get in contact with your local clubs, grassroots clubs. Once you've got your CRB, start doing some volunteering. If they like what they see, 9 times out of 10, everyone is always looking for a volunteer. They're going to ask you to take on a club. And then from there, if you're thinking about adults or a centre of excellence, to go to actually work in a centre of excellence, you have to have your youth modules 1 and 2 now. So you might have your coaching badges 1 and 2. You would then have to go off and do your youth modules 1 and 2 as well. And I'd recommend anybody working with youth players, once you've done your core level 1 and core level 2, get your youth modules as well, because it just gives you a whole different philosophy on child development, which I think is really important for when you're working with young players.
It's a good shout. Russ, Elliot, I hope that answers your questions.
Hope it does.
And thank you for them as well. We've got another video question from a familiar source.
And my third question is, what team would you like to coach for, and what manager would you like to coach under?
I would have to go with Arsenal. My ultimate, if it was, an ultimate dream job, my ultimate dream job actually would be head of education in a club, in a Premiership club, which allows me to use the skill base that I already have and then translate that to a football environment. Within that, I would love to do that at Arsenal. Mm-hmm. Within that, I would love to coach at Arsenal Centre of Excellence under either John Bayer at Arsenal Ladies or Arsene Wenger or Bold at the Arsenal men's team, purely because of their philosophy, and and their philosophy doesn't just run from the men's, it runs into the ladies as well, and it's all to do with coaching development. So it's not just to do with youth players and developing young players, they're also very much about how you develop coaches. And I've seen that, I can only comment from the ladies' side, and I've seen that with John Bayer. He's been more than happy to help me develop as a coach, and is, given me experience in helping me do that. And I can see that, how that translates to other coaches as well. So definitely it would be head of education with coaching under Arsene Wenger or John Bayer.
I hear that. The G-Man was actually saying, what was it you said before the show?
I was saying I was hoping that you wasn't going to say Arsenal because it might sound a bit biased, but you know what? The reasons that you gave, I liked.
Yeah, I'm basing it on their philosophy. Yeah. I admire their philosophy.
Rather than just being an Arsenal fan.
Yeah.
Gender in football is our next segment.
Okay.
Good few good questions in here. But we're going to open up with, do you think there are a lot of barriers stopping more women getting into football, whether it be playing or coaching?
I don't think as much as there was before. I think now lots of new avenues and routes and pathways have opened up. I think there's a lot more coverage than there was before. I mean, no doubt there isn't, you just cannot compare the women's game to the men's game. And I think in all aspects, you know, in terms of the money, the amount of money being put into the men's and the women's, the amount of money the women get paid in comparison to the men's. We cannot say that women play professional football because they don't earn enough to just play. They play semi-professional because they play football, yet they have to do other things because there just isn't enough money, you know, for them just to do that solely. So I think not as much as there was, and also now most recently, the FA have put out a 5-year plan for the women's game.
We're going to come into that.
I mean, I haven't read the plan.
We're getting
so I couldn't really comment or tell you the ins and outs of it. You know, that's on my list of things to do. I've seen a summary, and from what I can gauge, it's to do with participation. So it's, you know, there's many different things that they're looking at. So how many can they increase the level of participation of women and girls in football? So starting obviously at grassroots level, professional development centres, centre of excellence. Then we're looking at coaching pathways. So what more can be done to increase the number of women coaches, female coaches within the game?
I mean, on that kind of subject, I mean, what do you think of the 5 year plan to increase the popularity of women's football? Do you think it's a good idea, or do you think it's just the FA kind of saying something for the sake of saying something?
I haven't read the plan, so, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say I think it's brilliant. I don't know. I haven't read it. But what I will go by is on any action plan, I think it's great having a vision, and I think that's really come out from the summary that I've read, that there's a clear vision now for a better vision for the women's game, and the action plan identifies steps that they need to take to achieve that vision. What I will say though, having an action plan is brilliant. It's how it's monitored and evaluated. And it's through this monitoring and evaluation process is then measuring the impact. And if it's not having impact, what's then going to be done about it? So not just using it as a piece of paper, that it's a beautiful action plan, and it's great having this vision. It's making sure that this vision is, you know, is going to be achieved within the timescale that they put on.
I hear that. Another fan question. From Tom Hewitt, aka Big T, throw them T's up. What are your thoughts on the incident that involved current TalkSport presenters Richard Keys and Andy Gray making offensive and sexist remarks about the female assistant referee Sian Massey? And I want to add to that, in terms of barriers for women getting into the game, are attitudes a barrier to it? Obviously, relating directly to Big T's question, it's a case of, do you think attitudes are the barriers, and what was your view on the whole Gray Keys Massey thing?
I think where we are talking about barriers, I mean, where I'm saying that I think the women's game has grown, it definitely has. If we're comparing it to years ago, there's definitely a lot more popularity, but barriers still exist. And the women's game isn't on equal par as the men. However, when the Olympics were on, it seemed as though they were. And it's a discussion that I had with a couple of people, and it seemed as though that these barriers that seem to have existed in terms of attitudes diminished during the Olympics, because the Team GB at Wembley, when they played Brazil, that was a sellout. I have never seen that many people. Well, I was at the game. I also go to see, a lot of the England games when the men play. The atmosphere was completely different. It was a mixed crowd, a lot of men at the game, and a lot of men in support of the women playing. So it seemed as though that where it was about Team GB, it was the Olympics. It wasn't Team GB women, There wasn't this woman label attached to it. It was the Olympics, Team GB, be it male or female.
Do you know, we're going to skip ahead a couple of questions because seeing as we are talking about Team GB and women's football, do you think the Team GB women's team at the London 2012 Olympics helped raise the profile of women's football in the UK?
Oh, absolutely. 100%, I'd say, definitely. I think what they did in terms of the way that they played, in terms of the popularity that they gained with people coming to watch them. I mean, the only downer is, of course, in terms of certain venues, it was harder for people to commute to Cardiff and, stuff. But where they were, like at Wembley, lots of people wanted to go and watch them. Not just from, the female side, lots of the men wanted to go and watch. And Team GB women's team is still talked about now, not just from females, but I know males in conversation, certain names, Kelly Smith, will come up in conversation by, certain males. So I think most definitely 100% the Olympics, definitely have had a positive impact on women's football. But I do, going back to Tom's question, I do feel that the barriers exist in terms of attitudes. I think certain attitudes have changed, but I still think we've got a long way to go. And when, that comment, I distinctly remember watching news reports to do with that, and I just thought, what an utter disgrace, not only to your own profession and to you as a professional, but to the game in general. You're in a position of power, and you're in a position of power where you can influence the game. So why not influence the game for the positive?
No, true.
True. I'll be coming from an angle of, like, as an educator, I've got a lot of power. That is to educate a child. It's in my best interest to help a child learn. I can either make or break that child's future. Likewise, they were in a position of power to influence the game. They've made a comment that perhaps, maybe they felt at the time it was said in the heat of the moment and, whatnot. I'm not passing any judgments on them. But point being, it was said. And they're adults. So I think if you're making a comment and you're an adult, you know exactly what you're saying. It got heard. And we're in the 21st century. So you're people in power in the game, 21st century, and you're making, a negative comment about a female who made some brilliant decisions in the game, who done a very, credit to her, done a very good job.
Yeah, ironically enough, it was, I think it was during the Liverpool v Wolves game, and I think Raul Morales scored in that game, and Sian Massey got the decision right.
Yeah, I heard actually the decision that she did make, and
because they were talking about Kenny potentially being angry and that, and it was like if she had got it wrong.
Yeah, but from Liverpool's perspective, I remember reading in the paper, they said that they were happy with the decision that that was made. So I think that there are still attitudes that need to be changed, most definitely.
Another quick question is, does the men's game have to get out of the way to let women's football shine? Because I've said on many pitch talk shows, and I've said in conversation with the G-Man as well, that for the women's game to really flourish, the men's game has to kind of step aside a bit to let the women's game kind of grow and take some of the resources and take some of that. Do you believe that the men's game has to get out of the way, or do you think men running the women's game can be a good thing and can help?
I think the men's game doesn't have to get out of the way, because I think what that's then doing is putting labels on things again. And like I said earlier, I'm not one to have to be stuck with labels. What we're then labeling now is, by doing that, is that's a man's game. It's always been a man's game. Men's game, and we've got a women's game now. What I think needs to be happening is they need to be working in unity. So where you've got the Arsenal men's team collaborate with the Arsenal women's team. So where I say collaborate, of course they play completely differently. They train, sometimes they train in the, at London Colney, sometimes they don't. But I think there needs to be a better rapport and relationship. I'm not in it to know, so this is purely based on just, what I think. Perhaps there needs to be a better relationship and rapport between the female and the male Premiership teams.
Hold that thought, because our next question is a video question from the G-Man in regards to just that.
Can you see the men's game and women's game potentially merging in the future? And if not, is this something that you would like to see?
I would like to think it will, but I don't think it will.
Why?
Just my gut telling me that I can't see it happening. I can't see it merging. I think maybe I think now that it's gaining a lot more popularity, there'd be a lot more money pumped into it. Merger might just be on a totally different action plan. I think first and foremost, it's what they're looking at is participation, getting a lot more funding and coverage, and the thing is, when like the England women's game does get coverage, people watch it. When the England women's game was on ITV, it was being watched. When it was on BBC, it was being watched. And it's often when, and I remember a couple of the Arsenal games, the ladies' games were on ESPN. You'd gone, they were being watched. So I think if the women's game got a bit more coverage, it may engage people to watch it and see it as football, not labelling it as ladies playing football, but it's football in general. So I can't see it merging, and I think if it does, it's going to be in decades to come. The second part of the question, I would love it to, but I do feel they are, love it to in the sense that not playing together. But what I mean is I think that a bit more merger between both Premiership clubs. So, for instance, the Everton ladies and the Everton men. A bit more merger in terms of that, in terms of how it's run. So you might have, you've got your own managers and bosses for each. You've got your own management team for each. Of course, what they do will be, different. But it could be that, funding, facilities and stuff like that, there could be a way of them sharing. I think so. I'd love it to. I'd love that to happen. Yeah.
No, that's a good shout. I mean, what does women's football need to get to the next level in terms of technical prowess and respect more than anything? What does women's football need?
I think it needs funding. It really does. Funding and coverage. If I was to say that because it's gaining popularity now, it's not like before. It's got a lot more respect than what it did before. So I'm not sure that, there are still barriers, and of course, but I think that's going to be anywhere and everywhere. But I think it's money and coverage. It doesn't get the funding, it doesn't get the media coverage that the men's game does. Now, unless that starts changing, which I think perhaps where the 5-year plan comes in, the women's game is still going to be where it is.
So do you think that the Women's Super League was a good idea, and how much can that help?
Well, the Women's Super League is a great idea, and I know that there's going to be some expansion as well now on that. But again, if we're talking about in general, I'm saying holistically, in general, we're looking at the bigger picture, it needs coverage. Mm-hmm. The Women's Super League was brilliant. How many of the games were on TV?
I can't remember actually. I think there was only a handful on ESPN.
That's my point. On a weekend, how many men's games do we see? Sky Sports, Sky Sports, in terms of just showing the actual games. Sky Sports News, how much coverage does a women's game get?
Pretty much slim to none,
right?
To be honest, yeah.
So I'm, I think the Women's Super League is brilliant. all these other things that, are happening in the women's game, I think are, great. All these plans being implemented. County FAs really working hard now to promote the women's games. You've got lots of centre of excellences now with the counties, for girls to get into football. You've got professional development centres, which is like a tier. So you've got your grassroots clubs, PDCs, then your centre of excellence. So if players may get scouted from a PDC, they might then be great enough to be able to go to your centre of excellence. So I think that there are things happening in the women's game, but if it doesn't get the money and coverage that the men's game is getting, in terms of popularity, it's still going to remain amongst the people who would go online themselves and look it up, who would actively go to Boreham Wood and pay for Arsenal ladies to watch a game. £5 for a ticket to go to Boreham Wood to watch Arsenal ladies play. Quality, but for a high caliber players, for that a team that is brilliant at the top of their game, undefeated in the women in the Women's Super League. Compare that to a men's ticket. It's uncomparable.
Especially at Arsenal.
Well, I'll say it as an Arsenal fan.
The men's tickets are always rising.
They're extortionate prices.
No trophies, but.
So, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think it's to do with funding and coverage.
Somewhat of a controversial question here. Again from Tom Hewitt, aka Big T. Do you believe that the female game is being more sexually exploited than being promoted for the ladies' footballing ability on the pitch?
I don't think so. I mean, it's if I was an elite player and I was in that situation, I think I don't think I'm best placed to answer the question. So I'll do it from what I see.
Yeah.
From what I can see, I don't think it is. I think that it's again to do with media coverage and the amount of money that's been pumped in. So we look at newspapers, so putting TV aside, back page, so even non-league football, men's game all over the paper, local paper that is. How many stories do we hear of the women's game?
What?
But we go back to the Olympics, and I think, again, we're talking about labels. Women's sport in general was always in the paper during the Olympic period. And again, we look at the label, it was just London Olympics 2012. It was never women's or men's, it was just London Olympic 2012. So I think maybe it's the labels are barriers, I think, in general, where we put labels on things. Asians in football, black people in football, women in football. I think we need to get away from using labels and just look at the quality and caliber of the people.
Yeah. So you're an active volunteer in projects to engage females within football. As you've mentioned, Middlesex FA, London Playing Fields Foundation as well, and London FA. Now, how important are those kinds of projects in terms of encouraging more women into the game? And to follow that up with another question from Big T, he says, "Hi Manisha, do you feel that more should be done by the FA to help encourage local college and universities to bring out more female coaching talent than in men?"
I think that organisations like the London FA, London Playing Fields Foundation, Middlesex, the county FAs, they do now do a lot to promote the female game, and they, so like the county FAs, for example, have now their own centre of excellence. So Middlesex County has its own centre of excellence that it will run. Yeah. London FA have their own. They also have their own professional development centres for girls that they run. This is all now separate to clubs, like your Premiership clubs. So girls can choose, or women can choose, to play at a grassroots club. Female players that are younger, who play at a decent level, can choose to go with their county centre of excellence. If they don't hit the bar, it might be that they're transferred to a professional development centre to get a bit more training, to which they can then still play for a grassroots club. They then might feel that they're ready to try out for a centre of excellence, might go back to their county or go for a club. Now, the reality is, very minimum amount of people will make it to elite level. That is just the reality. So in terms of this triangle, the biggest base is your grassroots. Mm-hmm. So we look at a triangle, that's where it starts. So there are lots and lots of grassroots clubs now for women and girls to play in, and for any age group. So I think that they are doing a lot already, but people in the game or in coaching can see that, and I think it's really hard when people who may watch football but don't necessarily coach or are not aware of some of the things that some of these really hard-working people are actually doing. So you've got your different foundations that I've talked about that actively promote players, but also actively promote coaches. In terms of universities, they run a separate thing on their own already. That's already happening, and it has been. And you've got some, great facilities like Hertfordshire Uni, for example. Bath University, brilliant at football. That they run their own university league. So there's a system now where players who are at professional clubs, youth players, they would still obviously have to attend college or school. So these players may then get day release, or these college students, it would be associated with their club. They'd have a link club. So like we do, for example, in year 6 at the end of primary school, we've got our link secondary schools. Same thing translates to a club. You've got your link university. These players may then take on a university course, but they may then play for that university team associated to their club, but it's the university team.
So it's almost like a feeder system.
Yeah, that's it, yeah. So clubs have this feeder system for their youth players, so that already is happening. Other universities that perhaps don't have a feeder club have football teams, have women's teams, and run men's teams now as well. So all of that is happening. So I wouldn't, in terms of is there anything more, I'll bang on about those two things. Yes, there is. Money and coverage.
I hear that. And another question from Tom here, aka Big T. Can you ever see a female becoming a manager or a coach in the men's football league?
That's a very good question. Very good question. I would love to see it. And, if I think about somebody like Hope Powell, who's been a great inspiration, and I think she's, done very, very well, very credible. And where there are people like her who are very credible in what they do, very good reputation, I would like to hope that she would be judged on that if she did, ever decide to go and coach a men's team, rather than being judged as a female. And again, it'll go back to what I said before. Certain things I think may take decades. So in terms of this merger, where I said that I would love it to happen, I don't think it's going to happen yet. I think there's still, other things that need to be worked on. I'd love to see a female manage and coach a men's team. We're talking about Premiership level.
Yep.
Definitely. Would love to see that. Is it going to happen anytime soon? I don't think so. But, I wouldn't rule it out. And I think that anything is possible, and I think if people themselves, so if females themselves develop this resilience and develop this attitude of, I want to be judged and be credited on my ability, not on what you see, then, and keep pushing. You've got to keep pushing the barriers. It's like, trying to get through a closed door. You've got to keep knocking. And so, and like for me, working with this men's team, for example, it's a step in the right direction. I definitely, yes, as much as I want to work with Asian players, I want to work with, an adult team, but I specifically wanted to work with a male adult team. Why? Because I want to push the barriers.
Yeah.
And, fortunately enough, the lovely bunch of lads, I mean, yes, it's, not a Premiership club, but it's still a club run by men. And most definitely it's a stepping stone.
Race in football. It's always going to come to this. It's always going to come to this.
These labels, Labels. You should know now after, what I think about labels.
But it's an interesting topic at the moment, so we're gonna have to go to it. Us being from the BME community ourselves. So, do you think that enough young people from socially deprived backgrounds, especially BME, kind of Asian and black people, get enough chances to break into the game as players and as coaches?
Players would be slightly now different to coaches, because with the players, even grassroots clubs, you would have to pay. So that barrier is always going to exist. That we can't, I just think, is what sadly we can't get around that. However, there are clubs who really do try to restrict their prices, and where they do that, coaches don't get paid. So, for example, at our club, none of us get paid. Whether you're a coach, manager, administrator, you do X, Y, and Z, you're there as a volunteer. And because we don't get paid, we don't get paid for our travel expenses or anything either, it means that we are able to keep our prices low, so that people within the community, maybe those who come from difficult circumstances, are still able to at least try and attend. So I think that, unfortunately, it's always going to be an issue. But there are, during school holidays, there are projects that help engage children who come from, maybe socioeconomic disadvantage. So, for example, if we think about Brent, I'll just draw on the summer program that we had recently. So this summer, Rachel with Gibbons ran a summer program, and so while Rachel was away with Team GB, I was leading that summer program, and it was part of Brent's Fair Share Trust. So the Fair Share Trust funded Gibbons for us to be able to run a program of football throughout 5 weeks during the summer holidays, and it was run at a Unity Centre in Brent. Children who lived within the immediate area didn't have to pay, it was funded for. So that catered for that immediate community, and it was also part of Brent Fair Share's strategy in making sure that they engage children and families from disadvantage, and giving them something to do also during the school holidays. And that was run for both boys and girls. So weekends, maybe not, but certainly during holidays there are projects run by the councils to help families and children engage in activities. I won't just say football, but engage in activities in general. In terms of coaching though, it's slightly different because as a coach you're an adult. And there are now bursaries available to help people get into coaching. You know, there's certainly bursaries available now for people from the BME community. They're also, if you, like I mentioned before, if you volunteer at a grassroots clubs, most grassroots clubs have funding available where they'll fund your level 1 qualification. With your level 1, you'll also get your emergency first aid, your CRB, and your CRB you'll do separately, but your club will often pay for that, and your safeguarding. So, you know, it's an unfortunate circumstance, but there are things available to help and subsidise.
Cool. Again, another question from Big T. Why do you think, from a personal perspective, that the Asian community find it difficult to get into the football industry, whether it be playing or coaching?
My personal opinion is that I think it's due to do with their attitudes. I think that as much as times have definitely moved on, so for example, now my generation, so let's say, you know, I haven't got kids, but if I was to have kids and my child came to me and said, you know, Mum, I want to be a footballer, or, you know, whatever it is, completely unorthodox and out of what they really labelled as should do, be a doctor, dentist, pharmacist, accountant.
It's good jobs there. Money-wise, isn't it?
I would be more than happy for them to follow that. But I'm also very much about having a plan B. I say that purely because I'm in the game and I'm now seeing it from a coach, I'm seeing it in a grassroots club, I'm seeing it at a centre of excellence, I'm seeing it at a PDC. I know that a minimum number of people get through, be it male or female. So if you don't make it as a player, what are you then going to do? So now that I've understood that, because I've seen it and I've been seeing it over the last couple of years, that learning and development I can then bring, you know, and help my child with. So if my child came to me and said they want to be, you know, a footballer, of course. But we look at like a generation where before myself, that mentality is not going to be like that. That mentality is, you know, like my mum's generation is still going to be focused on get a degree, go to university, go to college, do your A-levels, go to university, get a good degree. It's predominantly around, you know, those subjects that I mentioned. Yeah. You want to do sport, brilliant, but you do it in addition to your studies. So until those barriers and that mentality and attitude changes, you're always going to have this issue. And also, so we're talking about the younger generation, that generation would now be up and coming. So they're not going to be there yet already, they're going to have years to go. So if their kids come to them, with that generation, I do believe, because I've, you know, spoken to a few people, it's going to be different. But the issues then, what I find are coming up, is their lack of knowledge in where to go, how to go about it. How do we go about being a coach, a qualified coach, not just randomly doing stuff? How do we go about our child getting into a club, be it a grassroots or a centre of excellence? Because often what I've found from experience, and when people have asked me for advice, the kids are too old. So where these kids, and when I mean too old, they're already hit 17, 18. These kids have hit 17, 18, not even been into an academy system. What hope have they got? Very little, and that's the reality.
So how would you redress the balance of people from ethnic minorities getting into football management and football coaching? And also, what can the FA, FIFA and UEFA do to encourage more Black and Asian people into football?
In terms of readdressing the balance, like I said, it's going to happen with generational change. So as the generation changes in terms of attitude, we may later now see pockets of Asians playing football at a higher level. I do believe Asians do play football.
Yeah.
But at a very grassroots level. So if we're talking about participation, I think if we compare that to before, it's brilliant. We're talking about elite level. There are some that play not at Premiership, but there are certainly some players that do play semi-professional that I've heard of. Like there's Purrow twins who play up near Sunderland for Darlington. They play semi-professional. There's Indy who plays semi-professional. So a couple of players who do play, Asian players who play semi-professional. But these are players who, I remember talking to one of the twins actually, and he said to me that him and his brother played the age of 11. They were playing for their grassroots club. So they've started out young. They then got scouted. They were then put straight into an academy system from the age of 11. They've now been in the system. Yeah, they haven't made it to professional, but they've made it to semi-pro, and I think that's brilliant. So it's they obviously hit it young, and that's my point. You can't be 17, 18 and then turn around and say, I want to play for Man United, I want to play for Arsenal, I want to play for Chelsea. It's just not going to happen. So in readdressing the balance, I think it's going to now come as a generation changes and attitudes change with it. That's going to take time. It's not going to happen straight away. So we're looking at the younger youth coming through now. With that comes educating parents and people who are looking into coaching on how to go about it. So we're looking at educating Asian clubs maybe, these, who perhaps don't know where to go. And that's where I do believe, we're talking about organisations. Kick It Out does a lot of that. They've also got their own Black and Asian Society part associated with Kick It Out that holds conferences. So it's already been done. I don't believe that it isn't. So if we're talking about the FA and people doing any more, that, I don't know. If I say it from a personal perspective, I believe that in terms of my route and my pathway, there's lots of opportunities out there, purely because I don't label myself as being an Asian female. I'm a coach. So whatever courses you have available, and if I feel that, they're best suited to me, I'm going to take them, whether it says BME or Asian.
Do you think there is racism in football, whether it be covert or overt?
Oh, that's a debatable question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why we're here.
I've never personally experienced racism within the game, so I'm not going to make past comment on whether I think that there is or there isn't, purely because I'm going to say it from my own personal experience. Yeah. I've never, like I've said before, gone out in terms of what I do within the game, outrightly saying, I'm an Asian female, I'm an Asian female, everybody look at me, this is what I want to do. I've just done what I've just been doing what I love doing, been gaining experiences along the way. A few people have pointed out, you happen to be Asian female, yes, but I haven't advocated it.
Yeah.
And I would never do that, and that's not something that I'm not about doing that. So I've never personally felt that I've been a victim of racism. Not saying it doesn't exist, because there are people who have been, and people that I know who have been victims of racism within the football academy system. Within when they've gone to clubs and academies where they've been spoken to male, we're talking about males, where they've been spoken to maybe in a condescending way, in a way that might be deemed inappropriate. So not saying it doesn't, just saying that I haven't experienced it. So purely based on what I've experienced, I've been fortunate enough to receive the support, like I've said, that I've received. along my coaching journey and development. And where obstacles have arisen, so where there has been resistance, I haven't in my mind ever thought, oh, is that because I'm Asian? Is that because I'm female? I've never put that as a question. I've never questioned that. You know, I've just kind of brushed it off and thought, fair enough, I'm going to go somewhere else. But that's purely the resilience that I've now built, that, you know, I'm able to do that. Maybe if I wasn't so resilient, I would question, is it to do with the fact that I'm Indian? Is it the fact that, you know, I'm a lady? What if I was of another race? What if I was a man? Would you have spoken to me differently? So I'm not saying I haven't been spoken to in a way that, you know, maybe I felt was condescending or inappropriate, because I have, you know, so don't get me wrong, I have, and I have been spoken to like that. I've just never questioned it. I've never questioned why.
Okay. I'd like to get your view on the whole John Terry situation, and could the FA have done anything differently? I'd like to get your view on that, and also, do you think enough is being done by the FA and the PFA in regards to eliminating racism from football, and what more can be done? Because obviously the PFA have recently come out with their action plan, with their chief executive Gordon Taylor. I don't know if you've seen the action plan.
I haven't seen the action plan.
But number one was speeding up the process of dealing with reported racist abuse with close monitoring of any incidents. Number two, consideration of stiffer penalties for racist abuse, and to include an equality awareness program for culprits and clubs involved. An English form of the Rooney Rule introduced by the NFL in America in 2003 to make sure qualified black coaches are on interview lists for job vacancies, which is number three. Number four, the proportion of black coaches and managers to be monitored, and any inequality or progress to be highlighted. Number five, racist abuse to be considered gross misconduct in player and coach contracts, and therefore potentially a sackable offence. And number six, not to lose sight of other equality issues such as gender, sexual orientation, disability, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and Asians in football. So that's a very brief roundup of the action plan. I mean, what do you think about the PFA's action plan? And do you think enough is being done by the FA and the PFA in regards to eliminating racism in football?
In terms of the PFA's action plan, the only thing I would question is where they've only used the word black.
Yeah.
That is what I would question, because if you're, you know, go back to labels. If you're using labels, then you want to use a label that's going to be inclusive.
Yeah.
So again, it depends on what are you trying to advocate. If you're trying to eradicate racism, then that accounts for not just black players, but for any player from any ethnic minority. So therefore, that black to me needs to change to BME. I'm not even saying it needs to change to Asian, because I think Asian, again, it becomes a label on its own. Whereas what BME does is black and ethnic minority. That amalgamates the whole lot, you know, and that covers everybody. So in terms of the action plan there, that'd be what I would question is this just for the black community? Is it just to help try and engage more black coaches and managers into the game? And if it's not, then perhaps they need to go back and look at their wording, because that's the way that it's been worded, you know, so that's the way it would come across. In terms of the FA doing things, see, it's really difficult, because you've got all these other bodies. Okay, so you've got the FA and you've got all these, so it's again like a triangle. So the FA's at the top, and then you've got like Kick It Out, you've got the PFA, and you've got all these like sister bodies. Now, the FA, from my knowledge, have the final say at the top. So we look at leadership. I did a master's in leadership, right? You're looking at a distributed leadership model. In theory, you would have thought it would be like a distributed leadership model. So you've got your main person at the top, so we've got the FA. You've then got your PFA, kick it out, and maybe, a couple of other bodies. Now, if an incident occurs, so for example, in a grassroots club, if there's an incident that has any racial implications, you would go to your club welfare officer. So these are now your people at the bottom. Your club welfare officer would then go to your county welfare officer, the next tier, and so on. Now, then you've got your clubs and stuff, your professionals.
So it's a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Kind of going up the
So
chain.
you've got people in post. Now, from the FA to all these people, how well and clear the lines of communication are, nobody knows that. I won't know that unless you're within the top tier. So where you've got organisations like Kick It Out and the PFA, who I do believe, putting that action plan aside, do really work hard and are really trying to eradicate racism within the game and are really trying to support, like with the PFA, it's also to do with supporting players. Because I think, like with this Rio Ferdinand thing, it's a hard compromise. A player may have said something out of context, but you still have to support the player if you are the players' union, regardless of what they said. So you've got to compromise now what that player has said because you're representing them. That in itself is just it's now another kettle of fish. So if we go back to this kind of hierarchy, it goes back to the lines of communication. If lines of communication between all these bodies are not clear and not filtered, if information is not filtered to these people, there's going to be a communication breakdown. Now, what people felt, I see it as that model purely because of my background in leading and doing, my studies in leadership, that I know where you want to distribute that leadership. The main person at the top needs to have a clear line of communication. With the clear line of communication needs to come clear monitoring and analysis. You need to know what's happening down there. So where you cross. Now, if you don't, and let's say there's an incident reported, it goes to your county, it then goes to the next tier up, but then there's a communication breakdown. All of a sudden, the FA are bad, maybe they didn't know about it. Or it could be, for example, things get filtered to Kick It Out as first base. Kick It Out, pass it on to the FA. Kick It Out seem bad because they haven't done anything about it, maybe. Maybe they have, but maybe it's the FA that haven't done what they were supposed to do.
So that's quite an interesting.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Point,
it's because the FA have the final say.
All right. In regards to that, what was your view on the John Terry situation then? Because I think the FA were a day late and $1 short, as per usual, to be perfectly frank. Because with me, they were very quick to draw up a 115-page plan, which I actually took the time to read 70 pages of. Most people didn't even read the first. But at the end of the day, they were very quick to draw up a 115-page report and throw the book at Suarez. But the Terry judgment took a year, and even then it was lenient, or seen as lenient by a lot of people, including yours truly, the straight shooting one. Now, do you think the FA could have done anything differently, and how do you feel they handled it?
I think with any of these cases, it's important that the jury makes a decision. So in this case, whatever decisions were made. What I will say is, with anything, it's important to be consistent. So where the FA made decisions to others that maybe were deemed, like you said, a bit, a little too late, or different to another player, I think it will come down to consistency. So it's whoever it is, be it the FA or any other organisation, it's about being consistent with your actions. So who the player might be shouldn't matter. If they've committed the same offence or a similar offence, then the punishment, that you give out to one needs to be similar or the same that you give out to another. So I think it comes down to consistency.
You know, I totally agree with you. And the G-Man knows my view on it. I've had my view on many a show about it. I mean, do you think the FA could have done, just to kind of wrap up the segment, do you think the FA could have done anything different?
Again, I'll say it comes down to consistency. I think that it's important for them to be consistent in whatever it is that they decide to do.
The future and other disciplines is our final chapter. You've been an ambassador for the FA's Football Needs campaign. What was it like to be a part of that?
It was really good. I really enjoyed myself. It happened again, I think it was around 2010 actually. So after I did my level 1 and 2, and I was a level 2 coach at that time actually, and it was, you know, like I said, I've been volunteering with the London FA, and I just got an email through actually. And I needed to just write about exactly what I do. So it wasn't an email saying, oh, can you be part of it? It was, there's an opportunity and there's a campaign that the FA would like to run to try and engage more people into coaching, and particularly look at people who work full-time already and lead busy lifestyles, to kind of showcase how they lead a busy lifestyle, but they all can also spend put some time aside to coach. So I had to then, you know, just put something together really to talk about what I did and what I do, and you know what I envisage doing in the future. I got a reply back to say, "Oh, we'd really like you to take part." So I did. There was myself. There was quite a few other people there. There was also referees. So there was a separate campaign. One to try and get more people into refereeing. And one to try and get people into coaching. And it was such a brilliant experience. I got to meet, you know, Stuart Pearce. He's lovely, such a lovely gentleman, such a lovely guy.
One of a question from the G-Man was, what was it like rubbing shoulders with Stuart Pearce, and did he pass you on any pearls of wisdom?
Well, I wouldn't go rubbing shoulders. Well, I couldn't reach, could I? Because he's so tall. So my head was the only thing rubbing, I think, against his shoulders.
That's very good. I like that one. That's good.
So I wouldn't go as far as my shoulders. Actually, it's quite funny. I mean, you know, I'll tell you guys. During when they were doing the filming of the ad, so the way that this campaign ran was we had separate media interviews, and it was, you know, our questions were pretty much based on what we do, and you know, mine was based, you know, around schools and teaching and stuff, and we then had to have those media interviews were then put together, and that was put out on a trailer on the FA website, and then we had to do an advert. So, you know, they told us various actions that we had to do and what they wanted to see from us, and that advert was put out in the cinemas. We then had to take our own photographs, so as a group and also individually, which actually today is still being used. They were put on billboards, they're at bus stops, and funny enough, a couple of cousins said to me actually, "Oh, Manisha, we saw you at the bus stop." I said, "Really?" I was thinking, I really dislike taking public transport. So what I was doing at the bus stop, I really don't know. And they said, "No, you were on the billboard." I thought, oh, they still, you know, posters are still being used. And actually, Callum Munerick, my youth module 2 tutor, he's also the FA Tesco skills manager for Cambridge, and he went on a course recently, and he sent me an email actually just a couple of months ago and said, "Oh, Manisha, I saw you. They're using the picture on their Respect campaign." So I didn't know any of that. I just thought, this is a great experience. And, you know, like I've said, I like to learn new things. And I thought, oh, this is going to be brilliant. I didn't really know who I was going to meet. I just thought literally that I'm going to go down there, be it, you know, probably take a couple of media interviews, and that's pretty much a few photographs, and that'd be it. Yeah. I didn't realise that a few years on that these photos are still being used, and they're now using these in other programs and other areas, which is fantastic. Stuart Pearce he's also a Brent lad, you see, and because I worked in Brent, so we had a few conversations, and he was just such a genuine, very down-to-earth person. And when we were doing the filming for the advert, so we're talking about the height now, it was funny because they had to put the camera across us. So of course, when it came to me, it was so the camera's going along, comes to me, and then they've got to go back up again because, you know, Stuart was, you know, quite he was next to me. So they thought, right, we can't have this. So they got these like steps, little steps. So they put the blocks. They're like little building blocks. So they put these building blocks together, right, for me to stand on. So to give me a bit of height, so that when they then ran the camera for the ad, it wasn't so dramatic in terms of the dent. It was just a slight, and then, you know, it was back up again. It was quite funny. They found it so funny. It was hilarious. You know, I thought, oh gosh, that's when I was rubbing shoulders with the planks. It added, you know, an extra few feet. So yeah, the experience was brilliant. And thereafter, we then got contacted to see if we were interested in doing a penalty shootout at Wembley at one of the England games at half time. So I thought, you know, I'm not a penalty taker. I've really never been a penalty taker.
We saw that when we met you, Dagenham
goals.
Oh
yeah. you know, first to admit it. But I'm somebody where I look at things as it's going to be fun. You know, you would have seen that at Dagenham.
That was funny.
I'll be up for a laugh. You know, and I'm quite used to not an 80,000 crowd, but I am from my teaching. I'm used to now speaking in conferences and, you know, speaking in front of audiences. So I thought, the crowd bit, I'm not going, you know, that's not going to deter me too much. So anyhow, emailed them back. Yeah, of course, definitely. Went down at half time, looked around. They put up the number so I went onto the pitch. The players went out obviously at half time. So they, you know, the media people did their little spiel. They showed our advert on the big screen, which was quite nice. Walked onto the pitch to take the penalty. Of course, I didn't score. But I looked around and I thought, my gosh, there's 80,000 people around me. And I thought, that experience, penalty gone in or not, I'm probably never going to get again.
Yeah.
You know? And to be able to do, my heart, when I was walking onto the pitch, you know, you could hear it. It was beating so fast. I was so nervous. It was unbelievable. But at the end of it, I thought, I'm so glad I did it. You know, didn't score it, but it was quite nice because when I took my uncle to watch the game with me, and when we were walking out of the stadium, a couple of the lads were like, oh, you're that girl that took the penalty. I thought, oh God, I'm kind of trying to hide in shame here. And I said, yeah, very quietly. He goes, no, but you done really well. You done really well. It was just a little bit off, but you done really. I thought, do you know how lovely? I said, oh, thank you. You know, and as I was walking there, we're like, oh, you know what? You done really well getting up there in front of everybody. And I thought it was because there was a coaches team and a referee team. And from the coaches team, I was the only female. And I thought it was so nice to hear comments like that. And it wasn't even looked at that I missed the penalty. Yeah. You know, the focus wasn't that. Because when we look at reports now, where is the focus? Is it on the football or is it on the racist incident?
It's always on the negative.
It's always on the. So I thought, you haven't focused on me, the negative. You've given me some really positive feedback, which is really nice. And then thereafter the Football Needs campaign, lots of media things just, you know, were happening and are still happening now, which has been really great. And, you know, I think it's important not, when you do things, I never went in thinking that I'm going to be in newspapers or I'm going to be on TV. I never thought that. I just thought it's an opportunity. And if I look at where I am now, I never thought I'd be doing some of the things that I am doing. And I really feel that part of it is as a result of me being involved in the Football Needs campaign, because a few people got to see the video. So for instance, this Friday, in fact, I'm going to be at Cobham, at Chelsea's training ground, and I'm going to be involved in Kick It Out's event. Troy Townsend there from 2 years later, just recently saw my the media interview I did for the FA for that Football Needs campaign, and has invited me to do a coaching session, which I'm going to do on Friday for potentially new coaches. So I'm going to put on a session to hopefully show new coaches sessions that they could maybe do. So lots of things have come out of that, which have been really good.
From reading up about you, you've got an ambition of being, or a goal, let's say, kind of footballing lexicon, is use that. You've got the goal of being a head of education in a Premier League club, and you did mention it earlier as well. What would that role entail, and what do you think you would need to implement it successfully?
Obviously that role is different in different clubs, so it will vary from club to club. And I'm somebody that if I have an ambition or a goal, I suppose I'm used to planning and action planning. I would have already have planned, and I have already planned how potentially I could achieve that. So one of them was finding out what the role entails. Mm-hmm. So I then went down to London Colney with the support of John Bayer. In fact, before that, actually, I'll track back. John was aware, Alex Welsh was aware of my skill base. I made Alex also aware that, a role that I'm very much interested in the future would be head of education, because first and foremost for me is I qualified as a head. I've acted as a head a few times. I've never actually had my own school. So for me to gain any more credibility, and especially if head of education in a Premiership club is something I'm aspiring to, I want to have had my own school, even if it is for a few years. Yeah. So first and foremost for me is, being a head teacher. But I'm very much about, your other stepping stones, you need to get moving to achieve your final vision. So I met up with, John kindly met me, and I'm very much about, like I've mentioned before, impact. So I went with portfolios. I'd already previously spent 6 months doing projects in schools, creating educational resources and analysing these and working with children and other teachers in different schools to do this. So I'd already, started working on things that I know I could go with and show this is what I can do, because I think that's one of the things. It's, you can say, oh, I can do this, that and the other, but it's very well saying it, it's harder proving it. Exactly. So proving it at an interview is often difficult, which is where sometimes, for example, where, assistant heads or, heads get interviewed, it's often on, like you've got to do certain tasks, or if you have to do a presentation, it's showing data analysis where you as a leader have had impact on that data to show that you're a good leader. Mm. So I went with the same stance with this, created these portfolios of the educational resource base that I had created, and then worked with the teachers to help them create. Showed it to John, who was really, and prior to that, I'd had a conversation with Rachel, a long, lengthy one, about how I'd looked up, I'd done my research already on Arsenal ladies, had a good conversation with Rachel, had a good conversation with Alex Welsh, who was very familiar with Arsenal ladies, and Arsenal, purely from his goalkeeping coaching background. Done my homework already, so I went with all of that. I knew exactly what I wanted to ask John. I knew exactly what I wanted to get out of our meeting prior to me then, being invited to London Colney. So it wasn't that, he said straight away, come down to London Colney. It was, let's meet up. I went well prepared with things, showing impact of what I've done. He was quite impressed with that. He did say, it's easier, and that's something he said as well. You can say you've done things, but you're showing the impact of what you've done. So to which he said, okay, I'll arrange a meeting with you and Shirley Askew, who's the head of education at Arsenal Men's. So come down to London Colney. So he arranged that meeting. I did, went down and met, so John was there and Shirley was there. And it was just really to talk about what her role entails as head of education. And, she has been a head teacher, so she's the next head. She hasn't been a coach, so she doesn't have any coaching qualifications, but through her time at Arsenal, she's obviously a lot more familiar with the game, so she does a lot of the teaching side of things. And so, it was very much, as a head teacher, the things that you would have to do, it was very, very similar, like, liaising with colleges and universities of your scholars, teaching certain syllabus. She doesn't coach, but some head of education in other clubs do, because they come with that expertise as well. Community cohesion, I've mentioned already. So, data analysis, action planning, strategizing, and all of that, strategic priorities and stuff. All of the stuff that you would do as a head in a school is very similar to what you would do as a head in a club, in terms of the education aspect. The variations are some head of education, like I said, coach. So having spoken to John thereafter, I thought, I want to be versatile. And if I'm going to be versatile, I need to go and get my youth modules, because I'd need my youth modules 1 and 2 to work in any academy. I qualified as a head, I'd done my master's in leadership, so that complements my headship training, but I want my own school. I need, even if it's for, like I said, a year, even if it's as acting head, I want my own school. I'd then continue my coaching experience that I'm gaining already, and I said, I feel personally I would then be better suited, purely because I would be versatile. If they wanted me to coach, I can. If they wanted me to lead on certain other aspects of their role of education, I'd be in a better position to do that. So I've done my homework, already, but that's just purely because that is how I operate. It's how I've been used to operating for 12, 13 years now in my role. Yeah,
kind of like just getting into that regimen. It's like, right, I've been doing this for this long. I know it works. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it, I suppose.
Oh no, I'm not like that at all. No.
Or is it a case of just taking on kind of more, and just kind of embellishing and then enhancing the skill set you've already got?
Yeah, I'm not somebody. Yeah, the way I am is. So you take things in, but then if you take in lots of things, some things are going to come out, because you're not going to, your memory doesn't work like that, does it? Your mind, you're going to forget things. So it's more about, as I've learned, you always learn things, and through the years, there'll be things that I started off with that I don't do now, purely because, they haven't worked. But there are things that I now do differently that I didn't do before. So before, when I was an assistant head, I didn't have my master's in leadership, where one of the whole modules is on emotional intelligence, how people learn. It's all to do with dealing with different personalities and characters. So how I now deal with people, having gone through those motions of studying and then being able to apply it into practice, would be different to how I dealt with people a couple of years ago. So it's not about throwing things out, it's just about doing things differently.
I hear that. You also play futsal as well, don't you?
Yeah, on a Friday.
What sport do you prefer playing, futsal or football?
You see, with the futsal, it's been run as an academy, but we play on 3G, and so we're not playing on futsal pitches. Although it's termed as a futsal academy, at the moment, over the last few months, we're playing it. It's a cross between five-a-side and futsal, because we're playing futsal rules, but we're not playing on futsal pitches. We're not playing on futsal size pitches. So some of the techniques we won't use. So at the moment it's an in-between. However, when we go to certain tournaments, it might just be futsal rules. Some tournaments might be just five-a-side. So at the moment, I'm just going to call it it's a small-sided game. So I've always been a five-a-side player. I've been a five-a-side player for 20 years.
Is that what you prefer? Do you prefer fives to sevens and 11s?
Yeah. Well, I've only ever played 7-a-side maybe for a year. 11-a-side I've only played for 3 seasons. I am a five-a-side player, and that is what I enjoy. But I think yes, I enjoy it, but I think also because I've been doing it a long time. 11-a-side I went into recently, and it's very different to five-a-side. I'm used to the rotation. I'm used to, the pace of five-a-side is very quick. You're not in one specific position. It's all about rotation and cover. 11-a-side is a completely different game. So I think maybe because I know one game better than the other, perhaps, but my preference is towards five-a-side.
Football or futsal? In terms of five-a-side, what would you?
Well, because I do a mixture, so I can't really, we're doing a mixture at the minute. Yeah. It's not just one. So I'll just put that into five-a-side as a whole, because we're not doing five-a-side, but we're not doing futsal.
Yeah. I get it. Any last words of wisdom, inspiration, otherwise?
Just all I would say is anybody that's looking to get into coaching, or start to get into coaching, it's be open-minded and be willing to take advice, take feedback as positive and as a learning tool. Get out there and volunteer, and I think you have to go with the mindset of wanting to give back and give, and even if it's an hour a week. Because if you don't, and you're in this mentality of I want to get paid, you then don't have the experience to back up your credibility. So, need to get a little bit of experience then behind you. And as a female, you need to be very, very resilient and very confident and positive in what you do.
I hear that. Those are words to live by. Those truly are words to live by.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. But you know what, Manisha? It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And you've been tuned in to another episode of Pitch Talk Mates. Remember, we got a hell of a lot more of these to come. Remember, keep in contact and keep in touch with what Manisha is doing as well. But on behalf of myself, Straight Shooting LJA, the G-Man and Jazzy Fizzle, I'd like to thank you for tuning in for another edition of Pitch Talk Meets. We'll see you guys next time.